Welcome to the Professional Dog Trainers Australia podcast, Dog Training Matters. Dive into effective training and behaviour modification techniques, share expert insights, debate hot topics, and discuss how to build strong, positive relationships with our canine companions. Whether you're a seasoned trainer or just starting out, join us as we champion methods that respect both dogs and their human partners. Let's embark on this journey together to elevate the world of dog training, because dog training matters.
Welcome to the Professional Dog Trainers Australia podcast, Dog Training Matters. My name is Trish, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Steve Courtney, who is the Professional Dog Trainers Australia president, and also Boyd Hooper, who is a board member alongside myself. This is going to be a multi-series episode. We are going to talk about dogs and the law. So we're joined today by Michael Faltermaier from Michael Faltermaier Lawyers. Michael's been a lawyer for about 35 years and is a specialist in dog training incident cases. Michael started doing dog cases in 2012, and since that time he's done over several hundred cases involving dog aggression, dog attacks on humans, dogs attacking and fighting other dogs, and dogs injuring and killing other animals, which is a lot. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you, Trish.
Michael, since one of the areas you specialise in is dog incident cases, can you tell us how you actually first got involved in dog-related cases?
When I was watching TV, I saw a young man who I now know to be, and who I met after the show on the TV. His name was Daniel, and he was on TV complaining about and very upset about the restricted breed legislation which had just been introduced in Victoria, because his 6-month-old pup called Doug had been seized as a restricted breed. Seized
by who? The council?
Seized by the council.
I remember that case very well.
And it took about a year and a half for the cases to go to the Supreme Court, and then back to VCAT, Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal. And Doug was released after not seeing Daniel for a period of a year and a half. And I was there, and it was just an amazing reaction, and you could tell that Doug had not forgotten Daniel. And that was my first experience with a dog case, and I did it together with the Barristers Animal Welfare Panel, which was a panel of barristers who worked on a pro bono basis, and that got me involved in that area, or this area.
Thanks for that, Michael. That was really amazing. I do remember that case very well, when Victoria had a big knee-jerk reaction and they started banning all pit bulls or pit bull types at the time. So just to go on, this part one of this podcast is going to be called The Law About Dogs Protecting and Aggressing. So the questions to Michael will be about dogs protecting their territories and aggression outside of the residence or the home. Just thought I'd throw that in because I wasn't sure if I mentioned it in the intro.
So, Michael, I'll hit you with the first question, because I think it encompasses everything, and it helps set the stage for what we're talking about. And I'm no legal expert here, although I do work with Michael on a lot of cases. Fair to say, Michael, we've pretty much always got at least one on the go, and often more than one, and we speak on a pretty much very regular basis every week, and sometimes 5 times in a week, sometimes on Sunday nights, because we're preparing for cases, and I'm doing the assessments and reports and stuff like that, as Steve and Trish do as well. So, don't take what I'm saying literally. You can correct me, but loosely, as a first approximation, in normal criminal matters, it has to be proven beyond reasonable doubt that you had the mental intent and that matched more or less the physical act. Okay. Whereas with dog-related incidents, dog bites, dog attacks, that sort of thing, it's different. A thing called strict liability applies. Can you sort of give us a rundown on how that works and what the differences are?
Yes, Boyd. Well, what it means is a court cannot find out the intent of the dog, and given that a matter involving a dog really is separate from the intention of the owner, the requirement to make sure that the community is safe and ensure that the community is safe means that if there is a dog bite on a person or on an animal, it is usually, unless it fits into one of the small number of defences, regarded as an offence that may well be prosecuted for.
Okay. So basically, putting that in plain English, so to speak, if your dog bites somebody or attacks another dog, you're accountable for it, even if it wasn't your fault. So if a dog got out, for example, of your property and it wasn't your fault, okay, somebody else left the gate open or somebody smashed into your gates and burst open, and as a result of that, your dogs got out, you couldn't have done anything about it, you were at work, then a dog got out and then bit somebody or killed another animal, killed a sheep or something, you're effectively liable for it to, a reasonable degree. You can't use the fact that it wasn't my fault that the dog got out as a reasonable defence. Is that fair to say?
Well, it will depend. The best way to look at it is each case will be looked at on its merits and the circumstances of each case. But generally, if a dog was to get out and be involved in an incident, unless it can be proven that there has been some other factor intervening, and again, it has to be looked on the circumstances of each case, you're going to be held liable. A better example is probably this. If you go through a red light, unless you have an excellent reason, you are going to be prosecuted and fined. So strict liability is just doing the act. So the act of the dog attacking or biting somebody is going to usually end up in a prosecution unless one of the defences applies.
And we'll get into those defences as we go. Okay, good. Steve?
All right, Michael. I guess a lot of people want to know, because most people I meet think they understand what the laws are and what they're allowed to do and what they're not. But what is the legislation around dogs protecting their properties or their owner?
Let's try and use or consider a few examples. Firstly, there's a general misunderstanding about who a trespasser is. Many people are able to enter your property and you may consider them to be a trespasser, but they are not. They have a right of entry. A child in trouble, a child seeking help, a neighbour seeking help, or a person walking past seeking help, if there were another incident. People might say, well, they didn't have permission from me to enter my property, but it's as of right. They're not trespassers.
Does that change if they had to, say, for example, climb over a fence to get onto the property?
Again, it depends upon the circumstances. If they're being chased by somebody with a shotgun, if there's a fire or there's an imminent incident about to occur, and the only way for them to get into the property and alert the owners perhaps is to climb a fence. So it's a really difficult question to answer in general.
Steve, I think your question was more relating to the fact that somebody that was clearly not legally doing it. In other words, they were breaking into your house.
Correct.
Someone who's burgled the house, burgling the house.
So let's call it something. Somebody comes in there and the dog, has a go at them. Let's put it in that frame.
In that case where they are clearly a trespasser at law, the dog will not be liable, or the owner won't be liable for the actions of the dog in those circumstances.
Right.
That's really interesting, Steve, because I know of a lot of people that are really frightened that their dog may bite a burglar or an intruder that's not supposed to be there, and they feel that they might be, the intruder can then sue them for being bitten. So, but that's not the case, you're saying?
No.
So based on what Trish just mentioned, some people are frightened of, if their dog does bite someone who they feel means harm, they think their dog might get in trouble. On the other hand, some people think if their dog bites somebody who they think means harm, they think they won't get in trouble. And it's never that clear cut, is it?
No, it's not. It's really some people are frightened very easily. Some people are not frightened very easily. Some people think they're going to be assaulted and they're not assaulted, and they misinterpret the intentions of the other person. So if it's clear that the owner is being assaulted or about to be assaulted, again, it has to be a situation where the facts are examined.
Let's say, for the sake of this, there was witnesses who confirmed it. Two independent witnesses said, yeah, this guy was attacking.
If an owner of a dog was being attacked by another person, that is, in Victoria, one of the defences against the action of a dog in relation to a prosecution for the dog attacking somebody. So, depending
It'll have
upon,
to be investigated.
It depends upon the circumstances in each time. Each case is looked at on the facts. But if I was being attacked by another person or persons, and my dog was with me, and my dog acted accordingly to prevent the attack or cease the attack or limit the attack and injured other people that were involved in that assault, I don't believe that there would be a successful prosecution. What I have to add to that is this. Counsels, in my experience, may not, at the start of an investigation of a matter, accept a defence, and often what occurs is they actually prosecute on the basis of, well, we'll see what the other party says and what the owner of the dog says, whether they use the defence or not. So it's important to get legal advice early, because some of the cases that I have and some of the local councils that I deal with, the ones that have lawyers working for them, it's a lot easier to convince them not to prosecute. But in other cases, where there's limited knowledge at the council, they will prosecute and wait and see whether the defence is pleaded or used.
Sure. All right, just to sort of wrap that point up, it's obviously a very different circumstance if the person has, I'm going to use the term, reasonable reason to be there. So like a tradesperson, mailman, as you said, somebody that's in danger or needs help or something like that. So fair to say, in most circumstances, it's not acceptable for the dog to bite, either in a self-defense circumstance or a territory. It'd have to be clearly shown, would be fair to say, clearly shown that there was some sort of illegal thing going on, an assault on the owner or a burglar in the property or something like that.
Yes, and each case has to be looked at on its own, because every case is different.
Can I just ask, as to sort of round that out, in your experience, with the cases that you've done, how often, but more importantly, can you give us without sort of exposing any of the details, obviously, but have you had cases where there was a pretty nasty dog attack, somebody was bitten, and you used that defence, okay? This dog was acting in self-defence, or this dog was legitimately protecting its territory, to use those terms very loosely.
I have had cases like that, and I have had one case recently where the dog was actually attacked by another animal.
Yep.
The dog was being walked, and while the dog was being walked, the dog was attacked by another animal, and the dog defended itself.
Okay.
And probably the owner.
What about more directly to the question I asked, where the defence was territorial and justified, or self-defense or justified? So not the dog being attacked, but the owner either being attacked and the dog came to their defense, or a circumstance where somebody was, for example, a burglar or completely, had no right to be on the property. We did have that one where that lady came in through the front door and was badly mauled, that we worked on together.
What I will say is that it's always it's so difficult to generalise, because the circumstances that you often come across or you get instructions in are ones that you literally wouldn't think could be written or could really occur other than in a movie. But if somebody is clearly a trespasser, the owner of the dog and the dog are much less likely to be prosecuted at all. in the circumstances.
Okay. Thanks.
If I can just add a question to that, Michael, just popped into my head, is it when we talk about what constitutes the dog's territory or owner's property, can you tell us if the front garden of the home is different to the rear garden? So let's say, for instance, the back of the property is completely fenced, but the front isn't. Is it true that people have a legal right to approach your front door so they can make contact with you, and your dog shouldn't be able to, or would not be able to call that his territory and protect it?
That's a very good question. Usually backyards, as we all know, are generally enclosed, and it's a lot more difficult to get into a backyard. So if somebody is in the backyard and saying they're trying to get in contact with you, that's less likely to be an acceptable set of circumstances, and you're less likely to be prosecuted. In relation to your front yard, we do have to recognise that people are able to enter as of right, and that it would, just like a postman or a delivery person coming to your front door, they have a right to expect not to be assaulted or attacked by your dog.
And there are hundreds of reasons there, aren't there? Like, I mean, kids selling cookies and, just anything, people asking for directions or,
Somebody up the street bringing a letter to you that's been addressed to you and has ended up in their mailbox.
Mm.
So,
Michael, isn't there a council in Melbourne, is it Wyndham Vale, that has made it against the law for dogs to be in front yards? Is that true, or is that just something I read?
I'm not aware of that.
Because I think there was, it may not be law, but I think there's fines if dogs are in front yards and they're barking at people walking past. This is specifically in Wyndham Vale. Maybe any of our members that are listening that are in the Wyndham Vale area can confirm that or not.
Put that in context, Trish is suggesting that the front yard is also fenced, and because people are walking along the footpath, the dogs are sort of menacing them from behind the fence.
Well, that is possibly an offence as it is, because you can understand the situation where people are walking past a fence, and I've seen it in streets around the area where I live, that some dogs rush towards the fence very aggressively, barking, and some people obviously don't know if they're walking with their child in a pram and there's a large dog coming to a fence that has gaps in the fence. It could be an offence of rushing, which means moving towards a person a dog moving towards a person within 3 metres of a person in an aggressive manner.
Even though there's a fence.
Even though there's a fence there, because you can understand there might be situations where people might panic because they don't know whether the dog is going to jump the fence or whether they're able to. Some small dogs get through or under fences. I'm not aware of that law in Wyndham Vale, but it could actually be an offence as such.
Yep, thank you. So, Michael, what are the circumstances if there's an off-lead dog that approaches an on-lead dog and the on-lead dog, the one that's under control, attacks the off-lead dog? What happens in that situation?
Again, that's a very good question. I'm working on the basis that there's no action on the part of the off-lead dog, but the on-lead dog attacks.
The on-lead dog attacks the off-lead dog, and then the owner of the off-lead dog is making a claim against the on-lead dog, saying your dog harmed my dog, even though my dog was the one that ran up to your dog that you had under control. The intent of the question is the person who was walking the dog on lead and had control effectively, for want of a better term, immune from prosecution because they did have their dog under effective control. And the fact that the other dog came up and got badly injured from their dog, well, that's just bad luck because they had their dog under control and it wouldn't have happened if the other person had.
It's likely that the person who owns the off-lead dog would be prosecuted and has breached a number of laws, including being at large, not being under control, The question is whether the on-lead dog injures and to what extent it injures the other dog, because again, it's a matter of law and a matter of fact, because if the off-lead dog was a small dog and the on-lead dog was a large dog, it's arguable whether the dog that's on lead is under control if it's able to attack the small dog. And it depends upon what the injuries are.
Well, let's take it as a bit of a worst case scenario. Let's say it was pretty bad injuries, and let's say even that the person who had the dog on lead knew that their dog wasn't very social with other dogs. That's why they're walking it on lead and they're trying to keep it safe. But unfortunately, some other person has been irresponsible and allowed their off-lead dog to come up. So the person's done what would normally be considered taken reasonable precautions to make sure their dog is safe by walking it on lead and doing it in a responsible manner. Then another dog runs up. That's kind of the context that we're asking.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Okay. It really needs to be an examination of the facts, and the reason for the dog being off lead needs to be known and proven. And if the on-lead dog has a propensity to get involved in incidents, well, my first question would be, why isn't it wearing a muzzle?
Why is it off lead, etc.?
Well, why is the on-lead dog not wearing a muzzle? Why is the off-lead dog off lead? And it becomes very difficult because these things aren't videoed. These things aren't generally on camera.
So it's fair to say, though, that the takeaway is that just because you had your dog on lead and had it under effective control, using the sort of catchphrase that gets thrown around, dog is under effective control, doesn't necessarily make you immune from potential prosecution or responsibility, because you could have done other things. You could have put the dog in a muzzle and taken either further precautions. Is that sort of the gist of it?
Yes. And look, there was a case that I did probably 5 years ago at least, and it ended up being on national TV, and it involved a dog called Hero, where Hero was walking with his owner and two of her children, and they happened to be in a park in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, and 2 or 3 dogs, including a miniature Dachshund or standard Dachshund and a Labrador, had escaped from an owner's property. And exactly what exactly happened was that these dogs that had escaped from property had the owner of Hero and the 2 children, had them in a situation where the woman had to put the 2 children on top of a concrete barbecue in a park, because they had them pinned in an area. And Hero actually defended the 2 children and the mother, and sadly at least one of the other dogs died, and I believe there were 3 of the other dogs. And what happened was the owner of the 3 dogs that had escaped had said that she was actually walking the dogs on lead, and she appeared in a photograph that she took of herself, or somebody took of her, where she was wearing a white dress and she was covered in blood. And one of the dogs that had died, that were attacking Hero and his family, was on a table in front of her. And the owners of Hero were prosecuted, and then they engaged me. And after that, with some detective work on the part of the owners of Hero, they found that there was closed-circuit TV next to the park, and that showed exactly what happened, which was the mother and her 2 children and Hero were pinned up in a park by these 3 dogs, barking and aggressively attacking, or prone to attack the family.
Seriously menacing, let's say.
And this actually was shown, the whole of the case, including the fact that the owner of the dogs that had got out was lying, was actually put on national TV.
And I remember that one very well because it was all over the news. I think there was the footage of the dogs running through the park.
Yes.
And then you could see it was a bit grainy footage, but you could definitely see it. And then they sort of
Nice
menacing.
to find out the follow up on that with relation
Yeah,
to the person
yeah.
prosecuted for perjury, for example. And
No, they weren't, and sadly, they weren't, because
but the hero got off. Yeah,
Hero
turned out to be the hero.
To his name, Hero.
hero by name, hero by nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great story.
Michael, what about if two dogs are both off the lead? So you're in an off-leash area, so an area where the dogs are allowed to be off-leash, and you have a dog fight, and one of the dogs is either badly injured or killed. What happens there? Like, is that just it is what it is?
Just before you answer, I just want to clarify the intention, just to make it for listeners, guys. Steve and Trish and I have, before we had this included, and Michael was included, in the weeks leading up to this, we've done a lot of preparation on the questions and things. So I just want to clarify the intent so that we don't go too much down a rabbit hole. The idea being here, this would be a sort of a circumstance where there's no clear instigator of the fight. Two dogs just came across each other and they were sniffing, and then it sort of escalated, and it was in an off-lead area, so it was okay. But it turns into a fight, and one gets injured badly and the other one doesn't, even though it's not clear that you couldn't really say one attacked the other. They just simply fought, and the result was.
Well, can I say firstly, I have had an incident slightly different where two off-lead dogs in an off-lead park have had an incident, but the incident was clearly instigated by a larger dog, and unfortunately the smaller dog died, and the owner of the larger dog was prosecuted successfully. But despite it being an off-lead park, there are still laws, bylaws and regulations in relation to how you are meant to act in an off-lead park. And that
there's also in the Companion Animals Act, if I can interrupt, Michael, is that it talks about a dog attacking another dog without provocation. So in other words, if there is provocation, which in many cases most dogs who retaliate with aggression are going to say that they had provocation, but it might not be reasonable provocation. Provocation does give them a right to defend themselves or take that sort of action as well. Is that correct?
Well, the Companion Animals Act applies in New South Wales. I'm not aware of a similar act or section of the Act in Domestic Animals Act in Victoria. But it's a reasonable point, and one of the defences is if the animal is being assaulted. But in the circumstance where they're both off lead, coming back to the question, and they have a fight and one is badly injured or killed, again, you really need to look at the facts. I mean, some dogs, I'm not an expert on animal behaviour, the three of you are. Some dogs may react to a situation where the other dog wants to play by fighting.
That's right. Yeah. Their thresholds are going to be very different. Their triggers are going to be very different. So, yeah, one could not have bad intentions, but the other misinterprets it, and it's on.
So it really is difficult to say in a general way what the outcome would be.
Do you get many of those, Michael? Do you get many people reaching out to you in that situation where that's happened? Or is it more if, dogs that are off lead on an on lead dog, etc.? And does it make a difference? Obviously, would it make a difference if that occurred in an on lead area? So you had dogs that were supposed to be on lead and one's off the lead and one's on the lead. Does that make a difference?
Well, that was the first question, wasn't it, Trish? The first part was if one's on lead and the other's off lead.
Oh, that first question, I was meaning more on the street, if you're walking down the street.
Right. But
I'm meaning like if you're in a park and it's an on-lead area and there's a dog that's off the lead, I suppose then you've got to look at the laws of the park. Is that correct?
Well, automatically, if it's an on-lead area and a dog is off lead, that's automatically going to be an offence.
Right.
The dog's at large. The dog's not under control. It's questionable whether the dog is under control if it's off lead. The best thing to do is, in my experience from what I've seen, off-lead parks tend to bring about more issues and more issues that come to me arising from off-lead parks where people have differing levels of control of their dogs, training of their dogs, and you have a mixture of not only humans, but you have a mixture of dogs from very small to very large, and you have a very big mixture of degrees of quality of ownership of dogs by the owners.
Something I could add, Michael, is that it's just spurred a thought that I hear and see a lot of just everywhere about thoughts that people have who have dogs. Someone might have a dog and they understand that their dog is frightened or scared or anxious when another dog approaches it. So they're walking that dog in a location. It could be an off-leash park. It could be any situation. And they feel that they reasonably expect that other people's dogs will not approach theirs. And I think that's a reasonable expectation, but it usually isn't upheld by other people. So what we're saying is, in terms of the law, if you have a dog and it's got known issues, and even though that dog is on leash and it's walking down a public road and it gets approached by another dog and it defends itself because it has issues with the other dog, then you will still get into some legal trouble. And this is why it's better off to use a muzzle and so on, so that you can limit the amount of damage the other dog is going to experience.
Yes, that's a very good point. Absolutely.
And they always say, look, I was just minding my own business, walking my dog, and their dog approached me. And while that other dog might be at large, if your dog then attacks it, then you could also be in trouble. It's not going to be one or the other. And you need to protect, I suppose, your dog by the dog wearing a muzzle so that it cannot injure another dog and leave you and your dog liable.
Yes.
I would do that if I had a big dog, a really, really big dog.
Yeah.
One common factor that ties that all together, to your point, Steve, but also just generally, that is always, Michael and I talk about this a lot, is sort of what sort of propensity is there for this? What sort of history has the dog got, whether it's official or unofficial? If you know your dog is reactive to other dogs, then you need to take appropriate precautions, and just putting a dog on lead and then going to a place where there's a high probability of other dogs potentially coming up is not going to be a great idea. Go to different places and or wear a muzzle and things. If the dog has propensities in this way, then you need to take precautions like you would with anything else.
Yes.
I think it's just
unless you're in the middle of the desert, bumping into another dog is likely.
Yeah.
So people always go, I had him there because no one ever goes there, and then all of a sudden someone did go there. So I go, look, if the dog has a problem, wear the muzzle.
Steve, that sort of leads into the other question. Another question from you on escaping. Can you hit us with that?
Yeah. What are the laws when a dog escapes the property? Dogs attacking when at large, how does that change things? So if your dog gets out, what Boyd's already mentioned, doesn't matter how it got out, your fault or not, how are you liable?
Well, you're much more because it's not on your property, you don't have the advantage of any possible defence of somebody trespassing on your property, or even if it's not a person, sometimes dogs from other property, neighbouring properties, get into your property, and in that case, you're less likely to be liable. If your dog's at large, you're already committing an offence by having the dog at large, and in terms of prosecuting if there is an incident,
We wouldn't really have any defence at all.
Well, we just did one recently, Michael and I, in this particular case, which is a nice change of tone, nice in a weird sort of way, but also bad, where a couple of dogs got out, German Shepherds got out and off the property and attacked a sheep. They didn't kill the sheep, but it was bad enough injured that the sheep had to be euthanized. It was actually shot by the police.
That's right. Yes, yes.
When they went to look at it. And so, two dogs, German Shepherds, at large, killed the sheep and sort of ended up having a good negotiation at the end. But certainly the fact that they were two dogs, German Shepherds, these are all sort of extenuating, aren't they? They're just, the fact that it was two dogs, the fact that they were German Shepherds, the fact that they'd attacked the sheep, etc., the fact that that perhaps there was a little bit of propensity here for this, okay, so the owners hadn't been responsible in the past, perhaps, of containing their dogs appropriately and managing their dogs appropriately, arguably. So all of these factors sort of tied into it, didn't they?
They do,
Yeah.
but can I say something that dog owners really need to take heed of? If there is stock on neighbouring rural properties, at least in Victoria, it's my belief that the farmer is entitled to and is immune from prosecution if there is a dog on the property and shoots a dog.
Particularly if it's menacing or chasing his livestock.
Yes.
Yeah.
I seem to recall that.
Yes, I agree with that.
But if a dog's at large, it's a different circumstance to if the dog's in the home. And it may also be that if there are significant difficulties or it's a major issue in terms of injuring other animals or people, it's a possibility that the authorities may use force that they would not otherwise use. So it's a really terrible thing that might happen as a result of a dog escaping.
Yeah. Can I just add also that another one that we did together, Michael, was we had a really good outcome for this. The other side just capitulated and gave the dog back. So without any follow-up, didn't even have to pay the impound fees or anything, just they literally capitulated. But the situation was a kangaroo got onto the property, okay, and the dog chased the kangaroo and the kangaroo jumped away. This is just a wild kangaroo from the bush, okay, so this property was adjacent to a forest and full of kangaroos, and one of those kangaroos just came onto the owner's property and the dog chased it and then chased it off down the street, down the road and things, eventually caught the kangaroo and killed it, okay, and the dog was seized and there were legal implications around it, and the dog was seized for quite a while. I don't remember how long, but maybe a couple of months or something like that. And Michael's nodding, agreeing, yes, it's about that. And then eventually, through Michael's negotiations and leverage on the council about simply a wild animal and blah, 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 it came onto the property, it was this and this, and made good arguments. And in the end, the council just sort of got back in contact and said, okay, we're not going to pursue it. You can pick up the dog whenever you're ready. It's ready to go. And so the owner just went straight down and picked the dog up, and they said, we're not even going to charge you any impound fees. We recently had a case, just to scare people here. When the dogs were seized, they were taken into a facility, okay? Let's call it just a pound.
Impound. They were impounded.
Yeah, they were impounded, okay? And this was in a rural area, but by the time the case sort of went to court, so to speak, or once it sort of got done, was a long time later, like more than 6 months, more like about 8, 9, something like that.
It was more like 10 months.
10 months, right? And the fees, which were reasonable on a daily basis, it was like $30 a dog per day, so 2 dogs, $60 a day, but it was like $23,000 or something.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so $23,000 to the owner just for the impound fees. Now, it turned out the council and everything was pretty good. Michael negotiated them down. I think they only had to pay half of that, and they were allowed to pay it off over time. And it actually had a pretty decent ending, didn't it?
Absolutely.
We got a pretty good outcome
absolutely.
on that one. But overall, these are all other complications that come into the dynamics, but probably more on that in the next one. Okay.
It's about property too, Michael, isn't it? So I had a client that their dog was escaping frequently, and the European car hit them and set off the airbags and so on. The dog was actually okay in the end, but he had to cover the damages of the car, which were tens of thousands of dollars to repair.
Which is that strict liability thing.
Yeah.
Right? Not your fault that even if the dog got out, it wasn't your fault, but you're still accountable for damage done by the dog.
Well, in that case, if it's the dog getting out on multiple occasions, you've got to question why the dog's getting out.
Yeah.
I mean, the onus is on the problem is the issue is the onus is on the owner, because the dog can't talk, the dog can't give evidence, and it's the owners, and the dog can't enclose itself in a safe location. It's the owner, sadly, sadly, people say they continue to get out, but in the end, there are methods that you can use. Quite clearly, you can put your dog in an enclosure, in a small
A crate or whatever.
crate. Exactly, that was the word I was looking for. You've got the onus. It's dogs are the analogy of dogs like being like small children.
Exactly.
Is very apt.
I was literally going to throw the small children and
Are you going to continue to let your child get out and possibly be run over?
Unattended, exactly.
Some do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Can we move on? I've got another, an interesting question. What's the situation with council animal management officers or other authorised officers, their power to seize someone's dog from obviously someone's property, and under what circumstances? And what happens if someone refuses to allow their dog to be seized by an AMO or an AO?
It's a big fear of dog owners, yep.
Sorry?
Yeah,
That's a big fear of most dog owners.
that's right. And some people think that they have to hand the dog over. Like it's law.
Well, that's a very good question. In Victoria, the legislation says that you do have to, if the council asks for the dog, and let's work on the basis that there is a legal reason for the dog to be seized, which is a belief that the dog's been involved in an incident and caused an injury and or serious injury. What I tell my clients, as a lawyer, I'm an officer of the court. I can tell them what the law is, and then it's a matter for them. They can make up their own mind as to what they want to do. The law in Victoria in relation to these matters is you have to allow the seizure unless you have a good or the precise words, I think, are a reasonable reason or good reason for not handing up the dog.
Like it was your assistance or service dog because you had post-traumatic stress or some sort of need to be able to keep the dog. Would that be a reasonable reason?
Some substantive reason.
Could it also be that you have the power to be able to contain that dog so it can't reoffend again?
That could often be the argument of the person that has the dog that continues to get out all the time. I can keep the dog in, but the evidence might be different.
Can you just address Steve's point directly?
Yes.
Is no, I can keep the dog secured so you don't need to seize it, a reasonable argument for not allowing the dog to be seized by the authorised officer, even though the dog was involved in an incident?
Well, it depends upon why the dog got out in the first place.
Well, let's say it didn't. Let's say they were walking the dog and it bit somebody when they were walking past. Like we've had those ones, what we call the Ram one, the German Shepherd. People were walking, dog was on lead, lady got bitten, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so now the dog's at home. They come to, this is a real case, by the way, guys. Okay, so then the council come around, the authorised officer or AMO comes out and says, we're going to seize the dog. They refuse the seizure. This is a real case, okay, that Michael and I did. And their sort of argument was, there's no need for you to seize it. We can contain it. We can protect it, which is Steve's question.
That's a really good point because I had forgotten about that case, and it's a very recent case.
Isn't the purpose of seizing them dogs so that it can't reoffend? And if you can provide a situation where it can't reoffend, and seizing the dog has no purpose.
I think the purpose, and I've never acted for a council. I believe the purpose is to ensure that no further incident occurs while the council is investigating the incident that has occurred. Now, I'm not saying that that's a good reason for seizing a dog. I believe that in most cases, seizing a dog really doesn't need to occur, just as the case that Boyd has referred to, where the client said, well, we can keep the dog adequately on the property and it won't get out. What I've done in the past is entered an animal management agreement at times, which can say, all right, we're happy to keep the dog in the fenced backyard and not walk it at all, or come to some other agreement with the council. But I think that there are a large variety of good reasons that people can use and rely upon, and they may be that the dog is a support dog. It may be other reasons. I'm just trying to think of a case. Sometimes they really are support dogs, very important to the owner, and it will have a really significant detrimental effect on the owner's mental well-being.
And we've got one of those at the moment as well.
Yes, yes. So what I do is I tell the owner what the law is. The offence in Victoria is a fairly minor offence.
That is the offence of not surrendering.
The offence of not allowing the seizure, and it is a small fine. The ramifications of the refusal may be that the council continues to try and seize the dog and has a warrant issued and uses a search warrant.
With the accompaniment of police?
Sometimes, and quite often, I'll just use the description of being over exuberant. Councils tend to involve the police, and you can it becomes a situation where
just escalates out of control.
It does escalate, and the police, you'll find that in some cases there's between 10 and 20 personnel arriving at a property to seize a dog.
And I want to point out, Michael is not talking in the hypothetical. He's talking about actual personal experience where there was, roughly, I think, a dozen authorised officers, police and whomever turned up to seize the dog.
And it just seems to be extraordinarily out of proportion to what the issue is. And people make up their own mind about whether they allow the dog to be seized or not.
Yeah, it is a little bit contentious and a little bit fragile. So I think we might leave that there and just let people make their own interpretations.
Well, people have to make up their own mind. I'm going to tell them what the law is and what the possible ramifications will be.
I think the most important thing that came out of that, Michael, was it's not a major offence. It's not a big fine. So it's certainly not a catastrophe if they don't allow their dog to be seized. I'm not asking you to comment on that because you're a lawyer. I'm just putting my opinion. Steve and Trish, do you want to, how do you feel about that? What are your thoughts?
No, that's fine. I think that's good for people to know that, they do have that option, because most people that I know that I've dealt with in the past, are afraid and said, oh, this law, I had to give the dog as part of the seizure, but it's obviously not the case. So that was good to know. And I think other people and other trainers out there that might be dealing with this sort of thing, it's good for them to know as well. But the law may differ in other states. I'm not sure, Steve. What do you know?
I think based on the question Boy just asked, is that my feelings would be, look, from a financial perspective, if they seize your dog, it's going to be accruing fees to take care of the dog, and they probably will certainly escalate beyond whatever the fine would be of refusal to surrender the dog. So I think that then it's certainly something people need to consider. The other part would be is that sometimes I've had clients contact me and say they did seize my dog, and now that they've got my dog, they're telling us that they're seeing all these behaviour problems from my dog that are supporting them, euthanizing the dog or escalating the charges or something. So when the dog leaves your care and starts being held at a facility, you may not maintain control of what evidence they find or other circumstances that you could maybe control if the dog was kept in your premises or a trusted boarding kennel perhaps or something like that.
What I will say is this. My view on the basis of the facts and the cases that I've seen, in many cases and in most cases, it really is unnecessary to seize a dog. And I've had situations where dogs have died during the period of impoundment. I've had situations where dogs have becoming very, very unwell.
Yeah, they've deteriorated
due to the conditions that they're held in, and they're inexcusable.
So, Michael, what about that case that we had a little while ago of the German Shepherd that died of bloat? It was obviously being held at a pound, and it died of bloat. I'm not sure if you remember. It was a big black German Shepherd. I forget the shepherd's name, but that's an example there of a dog that died whilst it was seized.
Well, it just adds to the point that councils have to be in a position to make a very important decision, and it's a decision. Seizure is not a mandatory thing that needs to be done,
despite what some councils might claim.
But unfortunately, councils seem to do it as a knee-jerk reaction in many situations where the dog can easily be kept safely and securely at home, and the community can be confident that safety is not at risk. So I believe that there are far too many seizures, and it does cause problems, significant problems for dogs at times, because of the nature of the premises that they're kept in, the fact that owners are not allowed to visit their dogs in many instances, and the dogs are just kept there without any interaction with humans or at all, or any enrichment.
Of course, we want to avoid it where possible.
Yes, and I can perfectly understand that.
All right, well, we'll move on to the next question. I guess members and people listening be from all over Australia and possibly beyond, but I'm in New South Wales, and you guys are in Victoria. The laws, what we've established so far, are the laws in each state can be different and sometimes significantly different. You agree?
I agree. They are very different throughout Australia. It's difficult to comment on because not only are they different, they change.
I just want to clarify a point. You have actually done cases in other states, yeah, other than Victoria. I know, sort of New South Wales, Queensland, I think Tasmania. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
and I've currently got one in Queensland and one in New South Wales, and the vast majority of them in Victoria.
And it's also fair to say, and I think you might agree, Michael, that when it comes to law, there's no two cases exactly the same. So the devil is going to be in the details. Like, people are going to have to explain exactly what has happened, some investigation, some, investigation of the laws in the particular state they're in, and then look at the case from that perspective. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely. Every case is different. Every case is different. And that's why it makes it so hard to give general, broad-based advice about what happens if this happens, because all the circumstances are different.
And that's also why you can't use Google or ChatGPT as your lawyer or get legal advice. Okay, so getting towards the end now, Michael, so just want to sort of have a chat about special or mitigating circumstances that would change the dynamics of all of the points that we've discussed. So I'll just throw a couple of them out there, but you can clarify the mental state of the people on both sides, the person who got bitten, for example, or the owner, and their circumstances, for example, not just their state, but could be a person as their only dog, or, they elderly person or something, or their limited capacity in some way. Repeat offenders as a mitigating circumstance, and other extenuating circumstances. So can you just sort of give us a bit of a snapshot overview on that? We won't go too detailed, but just... This goes to the fact that you and I often think tank on things. What are circumstances? What are the arguments that we can make? How can we, for want of a better term, I'm going to use the sort of, how can we sort of try to justify or explain why this might have occurred? Is there something extenuating or some sort of loose justification? Or just for the purposes of the listeners, sometimes we know the thing that we're discussing, Michael, is not an excuse. Okay, we acknowledge the dog was in the wrong. We acknowledge the event happened. We're pleading guilty. But when you're taking it to court, you want to be able to put things there and say, well, it did happen and we're not denying this, but this is a bad case. This lady, she's had this dog, it's her only dog, or this person's just had bad problems in the family or something like that. Or so, and it's not that we're trying to excuse the event, but we're just trying to
seeking a bit of mercy, I guess.
Yeah, softening the blow. Yeah, I agree. Or just trying to help the court to say, okay, well, this wasn't just straight out neglect or stupidity from the owner. There are circumstances here that we need to sort of factor in, if you will. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. Probably a better way of putting it is this: every case involves a person or family that have different circumstances, and the court will take into it, because it is a strict area of law, a strict liability area, the court wants to know about the precise circumstances of the person, what their history is, what their life has been about, what difficulties they've had, what achievements they've had, who is part of their family, are they well, are they not well? All those factors are really important. Magistrates are generally incredibly fair, open to things that people would not generally think they would be open to. They are very considerate, and they want to assess the person that is on trial, and they want to acknowledge the good things and the difficult things that they've had in their life, and they will usually find a solution in terms of a penalty, if there is to be a penalty, that fits that person. So people sometimes say to me, why do you need to know all this about me? Well, the case is about you. It's about you and your dog. You have a very special relationship. I need to know about you because the court will want to know about you, because there are many things that you probably have not thought of that the court will want to hear about you.
You and your dog and the relationship and the dynamics of everything.
Absolutely.
I might say, guys, after working extensively with Michael, and we think of each other as friends because we're confidants,
Yes.
We have ridiculously long conversations sometimes about things, trying to help dogs, even if it's just helping out and things like that. And he is an absolute master of that, of building the dynamics and understanding about the people and putting that in, not just from a sort of a wheeler-dealer legal mindset, but because he really does care. And just for the listeners, guys, I just want to say, Michael is a dog person like you wouldn't believe. Like his intent and his commitment to saving dogs instead of allowing them to be euthanized, and even not wanting them to be declared as a dangerous dog, which is sort of a life sentence, so to speak, from the point of view of having to wear muzzles and a lot of other restrictions and things. I mean, he fights for it. He fights for the dogs. He fights for people's rights in the true sense of the word. He's not one of those just it's all about the money sort of things. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And in fact, he also does a lot of cases for very little money, just sort of based on what the client can afford, so to speak. So I just thought I'd mention that, Michael, because it's nice for them to know that you really are just a fantastic dog guy.
Thank you, Boyd. It's really important to acknowledge people that have been owners of dogs for many years. I have a client who had some difficulties with his dog, but the breed that he had and he's had for over 36 years. He's had a continuous line of German Shepherds, and he loves the breed, and he would do anything for his dog. And there are all sorts of factors that people need to realise are very important and indicate to the court what the court needs to know about them.
Steve?
Michael, as a wrap-up question, and I think that anybody listening would probably, what they should conclude from this is that there's no clear-cut, general, this is what you do and you don't do. But what is your advice to people whose dogs have been involved in an incident? For example, if the dog's bitten somebody or been in a dog fight in a public place, what is probably the top tips that you could give most people or anybody to at least get started with?
All right. Thank you, Steve. That's an important point. And what I'll do is I'll include the do's and the don'ts.
Right.
Don't leave the scene in a hurry. If it's an incident where another person is there, please stay there and lend assistance.
We got one at the moment that didn't do that, and that's complicated it. Agreed? Yes, not Michael's nodding.
Please exchange your details with the other person. If it's a situation where you believe you're at fault, apologise to them. It's really important. Sometimes when people are involved and people are injured, staying there and staying with them is a really important thing. And the court looks at these things because it's not a good thing to leave the site of an incident. It's not a good thing to leave the site of an incident without exchanging your details with the other person and doing as much as you can to assist at the time.
If we were going to leave a scene, there might be one situation where if the dog is still acting aggressively towards, say, the person or their dog, or the person is still feeling intimidated or frightened by their dog, maybe in that situation, well, obviously we want to remove the dog, but if you were just you and the dog, you might have to leave to improve the situation. Would that be fair to say?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. You can't always stay if there's still ongoing difficulties.
Yep.
But you can say, look, sometimes I have clients who have an incident close to their home, very close to their home, maybe out the front or maybe a few minutes away, and they'll say, wait here and I'll go and get some first aid and I'll come back. Or doing things like that, just doing what a person you would expect or you would want somebody to do.
A reasonable person would take these steps to try and help.
Situation.
Yeah. All right, so that's right in the here and now. But the second part of Steve's question is, okay, so now we're a day or two later and you're now contacted by somebody, you're contacted by the council in some way, shape or form or some other party, and they've said, dog's involved in an incident, we need to get a statement from you or whatever, or we're going to seize your dog or whatever. So what is your advice to them then? If they get contacted about the incident and it looks like it has the potential to escalate.
Well, I think that's the time when you've got to seek some advice from a lawyer. Because again, I've said this many times during this program, each case is different. Get some advice. You might find that, sorry, Boyd, you might find that the other party has a bill for a very large amount of money because their dog had to receive veterinary treatment.
They did, yeah.
Or the person had to receive medical treatment.
Can I just elaborate on that point there that Michael said about seeking a lawyer? There are multiple reasons why that's important, but I cannot tell you. I would say that at least every second case that Michael and I work on has made significantly more difficult by things that the owner has said to either the council or some other party about it. Such things as, and these are actual ones, oh yes, my dog has received protection training. My dog's been trained as a protection dog. That's after it bit another human, after it bit a lady, and to a third party, I think it was like to a medical officer or something like that, was it treating at the scene or a similar sort of scenario, and said, oh yeah, my dog's received this or whatever. And other things that the people have said that they did that then make everybody's, the lawyer would say, do not say that, okay, because that is obviously going to be contraindicated in the case. So that's a good reason to get a lawyer, if nothing, is, what to say, what not to say, and, just being conscientious about how you would deal with it. Because remember, and it's fair to say, Michael, that the authorised officers and others have experience in interviewing these people, and the
course.
people who are involved in the attacks don't have any experience. So we've got this imbalance, haven't we?
Of course,
They're almost like mini lawyers, aren't they? Because some of them, they know how to manipulate, they know how to, get the information out, they ask the right questions, and the person is sort of almost, for want of a better term, it's a little bit almost like entrapment. They lure them in, and then all of a sudden they've got this statement, and that's basically they're being prosecuted largely on the statement.
So, Michael, would you also recommend that the type of lawyer that someone seeks is someone that has some experience or knowledge on local laws? Would that obviously be beneficial for the owner as well?
Absolutely, in relation to dog matters, but the difficulty there is that it's not a widely practiced area. If they can find somebody who has experience in this area, it's best that they get advice from them rather than just ring up any lawyer as such.
Other than speaking to their lawyer, what other tips? Steve asked for tips. So one is stay at the scene, offer assistance, swap your information. Other one is speak to a lawyer.
Cooperate, don't leave the scene.
But after the fact. So you've now been contacted by the council. You're going to contact your lawyer.
Get some advice before you start going and having interviews. Get some advice on what happened. Get some advice on what you can do in preparation for an interview. If it's a situation where you think there are things that you haven't done. Sadly, many people don't register their dogs. There's still a significant confusion in the community about whether your dog should be registered, and it's different in each state. And interestingly, Steve, you might be able to confirm this. My understanding is that in New South Wales, you actually register your dog for life, for the life of the dog on one occasion.
It's one option that you can definitely do.
Yes.
But it's the same thing is a lot of people don't register their dog, and when thing does happen, generally what will end up happening is that they're just advised to then register their dog. There isn't a fine for not, well, there might be, but I don't know many people being fined for not having a registered dog. But on the advice of get a lawyer, I just wanted to touch on something that people I find tend to think that this particular problem where their dog got out and bit someone or did something of that nature is going to be a council action, and they don't expect it to be a very expensive adventure, so they try and avoid a lawyer. But sometimes, like cases that I've worked with, the dog has gone and bitten somebody and removed a couple of fingers, and then the council did get involved and they declared the dog dangerous, and the person says, I'll do that. And then that was then followed up by a civil case in which the person was suing for damages. And by the time that they went, now this is going to be expensive, and got the lawyer, they probably would have been better off to get the lawyer at the absolute onset of a problem of this nature.
So I think that the take-home advice here is for anyone whose dog's been involved in an incident is to get the advice from a lawyer first and foremost.
Yep.
So, Michael, if someone wants to get some legal advice, how can they get in contact with you?
All they have to do is ring my office or email my office.
We can put your email address and your contact number in the notes, and also we can put Michael's details on the PDTA members page.
Trish, can I just jump in? If they're from interstate, should they still contact you in the first instance, or do you have anybody that you can refer it across?
Look, I'm happy for them to talk to somebody interstate. If they can't find somebody that deals in these matters, I'm happy to try and assist them. That's not an issue. If I could just come back something as a tip, it's really important for people to register their dogs, because my experience is it's a red flag to councils and authorities if a dog is not registered.
And the courts.
And the courts. I've had some recent cases where dogs a significant age, 8 to 10 years of age, have never been registered. The owners aren't able to give me a logical reason why the dog isn't registered. Look, it's a good analogy if you're driving your car along the highway and the police pull you over and the first thing they find about you is that you haven't paid your registration.
It's a flag for sure.
They then think, okay, this is an interesting case, and there's no reason why your dog shouldn't be registered. It's really important that your dog is registered, particularly if it's lost. And there'll be a microchip and there'll be a registration, and the council will be able to find you at times if the dog is lost out in public. But registration is really important.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think we might wrap it up now. If there's any other questions for Michael.
I think we'll deal with them in the next one.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us today on this edition 1 of the Dogs and the Law series. Thanks to Boyd and to Steve for your questions. Obviously, we will put all of the details on the members page. If you wish to send us an email, the email is info@dogtrainersaustralia.org. If you have a question for Michael or you wish to get in contact with Michael, you can certainly ask us, or we will put the details up there for everyone. So thank you very much for joining us, guys, and we will speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish. Thanks, Boyd.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Michael.
Thank you,
guys.